Hey everybody, it's Irene and I am in the studio. And what I am doing this morning is fine-tuning some molds that I have made for someone to cast some specific pieces for an event that they're going to be at. Now, these are vulcanized molds. What that means is you take a metal master, something like this. I mean, it's metal, so it's not going to melt at 200 degrees or something like that. And you put it in a frame. Let me flip this around. There we go. You put it in a frame like this. And I'll show the actual process here. That red stuff on there is wax, so I wouldn't use that side. That's a clean side. It would go here. It says silicone on here because your mold frames have to be kept separate if you're doing other than silicone. So say I was doing rubber. You can still buy natural rubber to make molds with. If I use natural rubber in a frame, I'm going to have to clean it extremely well before I can use silicone in it. It will affect the silicone. They screw one another up when it comes to I forget which way it goes, whether it's the rubber that screws up the silicone or the silicone that screws up the rubber. You normally just keep them separate because chemically they affect the other's ability to harden properly. So let me turn on this little light here. Woo! I would put that down. I would take this stuff, which comes in 1/4 inch thick sheets. I would put down a layer. In this case, this is 1 inch thick, so I'm going to want 4 layers total, which is going to make it slightly overstuffed, and then you just cut off the extra after it's hardened. But you're going to put this in 2 layers. Then you're going to put, where did I put my little guy? Little silly person that I am. Managed to lose my master. Okay, I'll go get another one. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Trying to do too many things at once. Anyway, I would put in this case, 3 of these. 1, 2, 3. On top of this stuff, they would have a sprue, which is just the, here on this, for instance. This part here is the piece. This part here is the sprue. And that little funky thing there is going to be where the button would be. Let's see if I have one that shows the button better. This one shows the button better. This one shows the button. So there's the piece, there's the sprue, there's the button. And what that's allowed, yuck. That's from the smoke in here. Anyway, moving on. That button is going to become the funnel that metal is poured into. So, then this whole thing gets thrown in here, and it gets cooked about 15 minutes per 1/4 inch at the temperature that I currently have it set for, because that's set for this particular type of molding material. This thing gets hot. This is set to about 195 degrees or something like that. I actually used a thermometer to gauge the temperatures. There's 2 plates here. I screw the top like this. It opens that up. It gets sandwiched in there. It gets heated from both sides at the same time for whatever amount of time you have to do for your mold. And you also compress it slightly. And when you're done, what you wind up with is something that looks like this. And I could trim it up a little bit more but that extra little floopy bit on the edge doesn't make any difference. If I open it up, these are cold right now, so it's hard to open them. You can see that there's a design inside. Now, when I want to go use this mold, I have to put something around it to provide more stability. So I take thin pieces. This is random wood. I use normally thin underlayment, floor underlayment like this. It works perfectly. Scraps left over from projects. This happens to be some sort of a press board that actually came with my original casting set. Lee makes these, and I get nothing from Lee, but Lee is considered like the go-to for low temperature metal casting furnaces. The black on the top of that is simply oxidized metal. This is actually, should be actually molten right now. Let me double check. Try not to get my fingers in the way of anything. Dink, dink, yep, see? And you would simply scrape that off, and then you would dip in. So let me get this set up in a holder so that I can show the process. Okay, here we are back at the casting bench. I can now do this without trying to hold the camera and everything else. I have some spare metal in here that I'm going to be remelting as I need it. Here we have one of the molds. Now these molds are cold. It's probably 35, 40 degrees in here this morning. So it may not work the first time. In fact, it probably won't. So I'm not going to worry about being super fussy about it. I am going to gently but firmly put a couple of clamps on here. I'm going to support the clamp so that this is mostly vertical. It doesn't have to be. In fact, you'll find that some molds pour better on an angle. You won't know that until you try it. I'm going to move the oxidized metal out of the way. Dump some of it out that way. Now I have clean metal. Sometimes I will leave my little scoop, my ladle in there for a little extra time to make sure that the ladle itself is not pulling too much heat from the metal. And one at a time I will pour these. I will thump to try and drive bubbles out of it. And I'll do the same thing over here with the other one that I have. Now that went down all the way, which is not good. It's not my preferred way. Sometimes that causes a flaw in the casting. And there we go. Now we leave them. These pieces here are pieces that have previously been cast. So what I'm going to be doing here is I have a flush cutter. A flush cutter is a specific type of cutter that leaves a completely flush side on one side. If you use a normal set of dikes, what you will get is you will get two cuts that look like that. You'll get a point on that side and a point on this side. Now the point on the part that's going to get remelted doesn't make any difference, but the point on this means you're going to have to sand it a lot. So I'm just going to get in there with a flush cutter and I'm going to cut it off. Oops, and shoot that across the room. Now it's almost perfect. That means I have almost no sanding or filing or anything to do on that spot if I decide I want. Anyway, I was talking about cutting off the extra bits. I'll use a different one on this one. Let's see, that one. Sometimes you get imperfect ones, and that's one of the things you check over as you're doing this kind of thing. Use a flush cutter, put it up flush against the bottom of the piece. I'm going to cup it in my hand slightly without cutting my fingers so that this doesn't shoot across the floor. That's going to go back in here. That is ready to go. All I need to do now to have this be 100% ready to go, if I want to, I can touch this up with a grinder. Take off, like here, there's a tiny little extra piece of metal. It's got a dimple right there, which needs a 20 millimeter drill bit to drill it perfectly. And then run it in a tumbler. And this will be shiny. Let's see if I have any that are done. I think I should. Yeah. When it's done correctly, it's going to look just like that. It's got the hole in it, ready to hang on something. It's all shiny. Yep, there it is. Ta-da! So, yeah, It's not hard. It can be fussy. I don't think of it as fussy because I do it so much. But if you overcompress the molds when you go to use them, it won't work right. Let me see here. I should have, there it is. This metal in here is still going to be hot. So what I normally do, I do have gloves. These are heat-resistant gloves. They're bulky, clunky. I use them sometimes. Most of the time what I do is I open it like this. I grab it with a pair of pliers, and I do a quick examination. I happen to know that on this particular mold, especially when it's cold, which this one is right now, this loop here tends to not cast. So that's going to go right back in there. So what I'm doing essentially is preheating the mold. Now that one came out fine. So then what I do is glance at the other side because it could have a bubble in it. It doesn't. So that means it's fine. And this one also cast fine. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is to make this work even better and more reliably, I am going to dust it. Now, this guy is your friend, jeweler's talc. It is simply an asbestos-free talcum powder that is used by jewelers. It creates a microscopic layer in there that makes the metal flow better. So I will open up this thing. I will dust it lightly on both sides. This is just an ordinary throwaway paintbrush, a cheapie, as they call it. I'll clamp it back together. If I overcompress, the metal will not flow correctly. If I undercompress, the metal will leak out the sides. And you don't want that either. I can see that there is a paintbrush bristle that was sticking out the side. That's one of the things you do have to be careful of with cheapy brushes. There we go. And then I'm just going to push the oxidized metal aside again, scoop up, and 1, 2, 3. Okay. Jiggle. Jiggle. Repeat on the same thing on the other one. These molds, because they are a much beefier, they're an inch thick mold, do not flex as easily as some do. I'm doing a quick look at these to see if there's any obvious fails. I'm not seeing any obvious fails. So, one of the problems you have when you do this kind of stuff is the need to look at things more than once. I'm actually going to turn on another set of lights in here. I came in down here, I ran in and threw on the electricity for the pot, and then I started the wood stove because it's cold in here. I'm adding some more. These are old castings that I don't need anymore. I can also add, these are the sprues and buttons from other pieces that have already been cast. Now, I won't do this with the ones that are fresh because they'll be hot. But that allows me to recycle this metal and reuse it because there's nothing wrong with it. Now, that one is fresher. I can feel it's warm, but it's not hot. You can burn yourself. This metal is 600 degrees approximately, and you need to be aware of, you need to keep your stuff sorted on your bench so that you know what's hot and what's not, because burned fingers are never a fun thing. Being careful, because you can damage the castings by cutting too close. I would rather have to go in with a file or something to clean something else off rather than accidentally cutting too close and screwing it up. But it is a game in terms of deciding what you're going to cut off and what you're going to file off. Anything you cut off, you can throw back in. Anything you file off, generally speaking, you can't. It's too small of pieces, and a lot of times it's contaminated. So it just has too much dirt in it. But you can see I'm just going through and I'm cutting off all these sprues and buttons. And that allows me to recycle all that metal. And the level of the metal is going back up, which means I have a lot more metal available to use again. I actually need to order more of this metal, but I'm waiting for a check next week before I do that. It's one of those little budget moments. So, now, see, I had missed the fact that there was a slight gap in that loop there, so that the whole thing's going back in there, because anything with a gap in the loop is not repairable. If I was really, truly desperate and I was casting in sterling silver, I could possibly solder or weld. I don't do that with pewter. So, okay. So I have a bunch here now. These particular design, the hand, has a built-in loop, and it does not require much, if anything. I usually, because I'm fussy picky, will smooth off any rough spots just because I like to do that. These will get thrown into a tumbler for about an hour. And, yeah. Sometimes I'll snip if I feel like there's a cut at where this loop is. Now see, there's a dent in that loop. I'm going to be fussy and get rid of that one. I don't even like things with dents in the loop. I like it to be a little bit nicer than that. This one's got a little bit of flashing on it, which happens sometimes. Flashing is simply extra metal that happens where the seam between the two sides of the mold are. I'll have to look at that up close under better light. And I'll decide. Sometimes I'll get this stuff half polished and touched up, and then I'll go, nah, I don't like the way it looks. I'm going to go through these towers, and I'm going to look at them and make sure that they have a little thing that sticks out on both sides at the bottom. Sometimes it's part of the foundation of the tower, and sometimes the foundation is too much missing. Let's see if I have one where it's missing too much. There, that one, that's missing too much. So, see how it's smooth all the way down? It should have a little foundation piece sticking out. So, anything that's smooth all the way down, back in there to get melted. Not tough. If you have a problem with a specific one casting, let's see if I have any marks on here that I can show. What tends not to do on the towers is the little part of the foundation. See, like that piece there is missing off. So what you can do, and I have done it on one or two of these, is you can put a little vent right in the corner here. This is done with a scalpel. And I simply make a little vent in the corner by cutting a tiny, tiny little V. You don't want to make the V too big, because if you do, then the metal's going to flow into it, and you're going to have to trim it off or file it off. To make sure that the vent stays open, you can actually open it physically by bending the thing and tuck a little bit of that casting talc in there. And that means that it will tend to hold it open. And when I hold it open, I mean like microns, I mean just barely visible to the human eye, less than a human hair. And that just is all it needs for the air to be able to get out. What the problem is, when you're pouring metal in the top, there's air in there. The air has to go somewhere. So sometimes the air prevents the metal from flowing into corners of a mold. And by creating a tiny little vent at the corner, you can give the air someplace to go, basically. And if you have to go back each time for a scoop of metal, do it. Do what works for you. You need to experiment yourself. and choose to do what's successful. Some of the molds, let's see, pull a different mold. Okay, this is a Hubert's Horn Pilgrim's Badge. It makes a horn-shaped, like a hunting horn, shaped pilgrim's badge, very popular in the Middle Ages. And if I squish this too much, because it's a smaller mold and not as stiff, it's made out of this green stuff instead of this white stuff, it will flex the mold. Watch it. I think when I squeeze, you can see the way it'll actually open. So if I were to put a clamp on there and squish too hard in the middle, it'll actually cause the mold seam to open. It would mean that I would get a lot of metal coming out into that seam area. It would make it very messy, a lot of cleanup. And the purpose is to get these things adjusted so that there's little, if any, cleanup. So if you have something like this that's squishing, you have to be careful. That's why for something like this, I would definitively use a couple of small pieces of wood like that, one on each side, with a clamp. And these are cheapy clamps that I get from Harbor Freight. And eventually you'll ruin the clamps because, well, it ruins them, but they're still useful. What happens? This one fell apart. But this part here has a rubber cover on it, plastic, and it melts when it gets this pewter on it. Now, that doesn't affect the ability of the clamp to work. It makes it look not pretty, and it smells bad, but it's fine. But any of these smaller molds like this will flex a lot more. This one I purposefully made in the white material, which has to be vulcanized, so that it will be less flexible, because if you're not somebody who does this all the time, you'll have more trouble with the green stuff. This is a mold for a spindle whirl, the weight that's used on a spindle to make it spin around in a circle. Let's see, here we go. This should be cold enough now to be able to get in there and take a good look. Now that didn't cast, that loop didn't cast. That one didn't cast either. And that one did. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes you can figure out, for instance, I have molds that I can look on the inside and I can say, okay, that one cast, this one didn't cast, this one didn't cast. Okay, is there something I can do with those two differently? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is something like, oh, there's a little piece of metal left over here from the previous casting that's affecting it. Sometimes the answer is maybe I need to dust it with a little bit more casting talc. Sometimes the answer is maybe I need to tip it. So some of the molds that I cast are very, very fussy and need to be tipped in one direction or another in order to work better. And that's an experimentation time thing. I'm not casting these in rapid succession, so the molds are cooling down a little bit more than maybe might be ideal. Also, sometimes when I pour, my pour is not perfect. So, you know, if I'm being fussy, I would pour the metal in and smack the mold after each pour. Sometimes, if the mold's warmed up really well, I'll just let it be and pour all three and then check. Let's see how we're doing on this mold. Okay, but not wonderful. I'm not thrilled with that. Okay, so and what I do when I'm checking out a mold is I'll actually line the pieces up. Okay. This one over here is doing perfectly. One in the middle is doing okay. One on this side is doing less okay. It's not casting the corners of these two. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to leave this here for a second. I'm going to get a sharp thing. Sharp thing. Yes, this is a scalpel. They sell these to jewelers too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a tiny little vent right there. What I'm trying to do is, I have to mail this today, and I'm trying to get this mold to the point where it will behave well for the recipient without me being there and things like that. The person that I'm sending it to, I don't know how much experience they have with these type of molds. I know that they have experience with soapstone molds. Now, soapstone molds are exactly what I just called them, soapstone. They're made out of stone, so they don't flex. Here's some of the soapstone molds I have. And there's a heart, for instance. It'll be poured this way. You have to put another one on there, obviously, in order to make it flat. Try to find the other side of this one. So I might put it like that. And you can see the metal goes right in there. This doesn't flex. All I have to do is have two flat surfaces here. So it's a slightly different game. This is very cold right now because it's been under the workbench. And like I say, it was probably 35 in here when I got here this morning. Sometimes you'll have molds that have an additional thing like that. So that'll create more of a round sprue area where the metal gets poured in there. Some of my molds, you'll see marks on them where all I have to do is line up a specific color. In this case, I can see there's a line there and there's a line there. I line those up. That makes this work perfectly for pouring that hard. But if you're accustomed to, oh, here's what's the other one? I have the, there it is. I have the same Hubert's horn that I showed you. Let's see, which one of those was this? One of these. Or did I put it away? I may have put it away. Yeah, I did. I put it away. I was being too efficient. There we go. They're both horns. There's the horn in soapstone. There's the horn in, this happens to be RTV, which is room temperature vulcanizing silicone. This white stuff is not room temperature vulcanizing. It will not hold up as well. The RTV will not hold up quite as well as the vulcanized stuff will. But there, you can see how having a rigid thing makes for different sets of issues and different sorts of solutions than having to deal with something that flexes. So that's what I am doing today, is I'm trying to fine-tune these molds so that they work. You're never going to get a mold that works 100% of the times, but I want it to work most of the time so that people don't have an issue with it. Like I say, I've been doing this. I do this a lot. I do this for my own shop, and I am pretty confident about what I'm doing. I'm not winging it in some ways, and in other ways I'm winging it a lot because I know what the variables are. You know, for instance, it's cold in here. So I know that that is a variable in terms of if I leave these molds unused for any length of time, they will chill down. These pieces that came out just a couple minutes ago can be trimmed off. Be careful when you toss the metal back in. It does splash. And it hurts when it hits your hand because it's 600 degrees. A lot of times I don't toss it quite as much as enthusiasm as I am today. But that is what I am doing this morning. And my goal is to get this all in the mail this afternoon. So I need to get back to work. Hope you found this interesting. It's sort of an odd little sideline that I do as part of my business. I do pieces for other people who need pieces made. And in this case, I carved wax masters, and then I made squishy molds like this out of room temperature vulcanizing material. And then, because the person wants to do production on this and needs quite a few at the same time, I created these vulcanized molds, which should more than hold up to do the job that they need done. And yeah, and I have the masters, so if anything were to go wrong with these, give me 2 hours and I can create another master mold like this one. So yeah, that's what it takes, 2 hours, because it's about a figure. It's a little more than that, but say 2.5 if you want to do the cool down part. You throw the vulcanizer on so that it's heating. You put the silicone sheets into the mold frame. You put the masters in place, which are like this actually, except heavily polished and 100% ready to go. And then you put 2 more sheets of the silicone on top. You clamp it all. You throw it in the vulcanizer. It gets cooked for an hour and 5 minutes. I usually give it the extra 5 to 10, depending on how cold the room is, just to make sure we're really getting it up to temp. Then you need to let it cool down. Now, in order to hurry that cooling down process, I take apart the mold completely and I throw it on the floor. Now, that may sound funny, but I have a cement floor in here. So everything there that I'm using is aluminum, and the cement pulls the heat out of the aluminum very quickly. So it allows me to cool down the mold much, much faster than if I was just sitting in the room out in the air. So I literally throw it on the floor. It's all swept up over by the vulcanizer. And I can play with the plates again in 15 minutes. The frame, usually after 20 minutes, I can pop out the mold, which is just this part here, and then set that aside for another little bit to cool before you cut it, because it has to be cut open with a scalpel. And I buy, these are actual scalpels like you would use at a medical facility. They're made in Germany, and the blades are not sanitized. So when you cut yourself, you need to be aware that they're not sanitized, because it is an inevitability that at some point you will cut yourself. I managed to stab myself the other day, which is never good, because you bleed really well when you do that. But yeah, that is what I'm doing. So I hope you guys found that a little interesting. And I got to get back to work. So, yep,